SABC News presentation.
Good evening and welcome to Interface. My name is Thembi Samachele. Tonight, the Black Business Council has taken a tough stance, calling on government to blacklist construction companies for price fixing and uncompetitive behaviour. Now, you may have heard 15 companies have agreed to pay a total of 1.46 billion rand for collusive tendering. And tonight we speak to the council CEO Xolani Qubeka, and we also want to talk to him about the proposed merger or unity between the Black Business Council and also Business Unity South Africa, and also the growth of black business and challenges faced by black business in South Africa. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take your SMSs, but we will be able to take your Facebook messages, and our Facebook page is Interface on SABC3. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
In very simple terms, what have these companies done?
Well, in essence, I think they've robbed the taxpayers, of hard-earned earnings. The fact that they thought of themselves to be the beneficiaries of the various tenders in a manner that would in fact fleece the state is a very selfish and greedy move.
But Glenn, for those who may not have heard, what did they do? They had these secret meetings, they were sitting and they were deciding on who would win the tenders. Just take us through the basic behavior that they engaged in.
Well, I think from our side, we don't have the salient details, but our understanding is that the various companies got together and sought to fix the price that needs to be charged to government and other clients so that they can benefit, to the extent that they had planned also to say those bidders who would lose, they would also benefit. It means there'll be a loser's fee that coming out of these contracts, as it were. So you can see that in fact these were very, very selfish, I think, greedy individuals who would do anything, to create wealth for themselves.
So 1.46 billion rand to most of us in South Africa sounds like a lot of money. You say it's a slap on the wrist. Why?
Well, it is a slap in the wrist if you consider the amounts involved in terms of those contracts themselves. We are told, for instance, that they have made around 46 billion out of those contracts. So therefore, if you consider the upside for them and therefore what the fiscus, has lost, what they have been charged is as insignificant.
We've heard the Economic Development Minister, Ibrahim Patel, saying, look, this is a good start. If they should do it again, then we should consider harsher penalties or, even criminal charges. Would you agree with that kind of thought?
Well, we do not agree, you see, because justice, cannot have exclusive measures. If someone were to have robbed a bank, as an example, and he's charged for that, they would not say, let's charge you a penalty. If we found you again to have robbed the bank, we will then get serious with you. So we need to be able to balance. Why is the special measure, for this type of behavior? Corruption is corruption. This is fraud. This is criminal behavior.
So you've got access to the Ministry of Economic Development as the Black Business Council. You surely have had talks with the Competition Commission. What's the rationale behind the fine that has been imposed on these companies?
Well, our understanding is that if the ministry, or if rather the Competition Commission, would have focused on every single case, it would have taken government probably 10 years or so just to deal with the matter. So this sort of measure was what they call fast-track justice, as it were. But it does not preclude any other aggrieved party from also seeking damages in this regard. We understand, obviously, that a number of government departments, such as the Department of Public Works, as an example, are also considering damages that may have been incurred in this instance. But the major casualty in this has been transformation itself. You know, because you would probably know that there would have been a number of other black-owned companies who also wanted to tender. Obviously, they came from a very naive understanding of competition, you know, because they came in blindly thinking, you know, you simply cost, put your markup, you know, and then you charge and you submit a proposal.
And they didn't know that you had to be part of a clan or a group
clan, you know,
to be able to get in.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there are obviously black owned companies or black individuals who may have been part of these companies, what we term your BE partners. We doubt whether they would have been told that there is such practice. So in a sense.
And if they were told, would you support a move to have them punished as well or fined?
Yes, exactly. They would not be any different from what we would then call their masters.
Mr. Qubeka, you know, Minister Patel has said, look, at least these cartels have been dismantled. At least the secrecy has been unveiled. And you have now these partners, quote unquote, turning on each other and telling the truth about what actually happened. That is a good enough start. And that's what the Competition Commission has said as well. Do you not agree with that?
Well, I think to an extent we agree, you know, but I think the major problem is that these were not just people who came voluntarily. If one of them had not sung, you know, as an example, they would have continued to do this type of practices. So we think it is a practice that is ingrained. You'll remember also that we had similar collusion within the bread as an example. Exactly. Yeah. So we still have, in my view, we still are going to uncover more and more. We believe that the justice system should make an example so that this practice, you know, should not occur.
What do you think should happen from a justice perspective and also from a business perspective?
Well, I think there are individuals who are directors of those companies, people who took those decisions, you know. We think they also had fiduciary duties, and therefore they failed to perform their fiduciary duties. So, in fact, whilst the corporations are charged, but the actual perpetrators are those people who are in management and the directors themselves, the ones that...
And should they go to jail?
Well, if be so, yes.
Okay, hold that thought. And I also want to ask you after the break if the South African economy can actually afford the kind of measures that you are calling for. We're discussing the price fixing issue in the construction industry. If you have thoughts about this, do drop us a line on our Facebook page. It's Interface on SABC3. We're back after this. We're back with the CEO of the Black Business Council, Xolani Qubeka, and we are talking about collusion in the construction sector. And of course, we do welcome your thoughts on our Facebook page. Do keep them coming, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, before the break, the question I wanted to ask you was, it's all good and well, and I think most South Africans would agree that these guys have robbed the taxpayer, have robbed the country of so much, and should be punished in one or another way. But on a pragmatic level, can we really say, let's ban them, let's deregister them, and let's keep them from getting any further tenders, when we know we have a country that has such a huge infrastructure need, and we will need more construction in the sector?
Well, remember that there are over 100,000 companies that are registered within the CIDB, you know, as it were. Now, we're only talking here about 15 companies who had been involved.
But most of them are the big ones. Let's be practical about it.
Yes, but there are a number of big ones who are not necessarily listed as an example, who probably are not in the same grade 9 as an example, they are but at grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. Those companies would be able, I think, to come together, build the necessary capacity, and we also believe that people are mobile. Those employees who are critical and work for those companies, as an example, they've not been involved in any act, and therefore they can work with whoever they want to. So I don't think the country could be held ransom because a few companies, have been found guilty. The building industry in this country has got enormous capacity. It's not just the main companies. There are a number of companies who are unlisted who continue to do work unnoticed.
And can they actually carry the load of the development that South Africa needs? Is
No,
the question
indeed.
I'm asking.
No, indeed, there is capacity in this country. There is capacity.
All right. Now, in terms of just what the Black Business Council is calling for, if they were to be deregistered, and you also have called for what we call set-aside, so when tendering, and not just in this sector, when tendering, that there should be a certain amount of tenders that should be set aside for black business people to then compete for those tenders. How practical is that, and would that not go against the very competition that we're trying to support here?
Yeah, I think the issue of set aside is misunderstood. What we're saying here is that where, as an example, there is this 1 trillion rands worth of infrastructure development, we are saying there should be a significant percent that would be set aside for black-owned companies. And we've said at least 40%. But what we are not saying is that the set-aside projects should have surnames. What we are saying is that they should be set aside for competent, capable, black-owned companies that between themselves also they would compete for those tenders.
But shouldn't the black business or the black companies within these sectors come together and become big enough and capacitated enough to compete on par with the other companies, the white-owned companies?
No, that's exactly what we are promoting. What we're saying, and we always say this, that small isn't sustainable. Therefore, companies that are as SMMEs need to come together to bring a variety of competencies that is resident within the various companies, and to be able to have scale and be competent. That's what we are promoting. I mean, we've seen, for instance, in the auditing firms where certain measures have happened. One, I mean, Goboto came together with Sizwe and Saluba. Now we have Sizwe and Saluba Goboto, and no sooner have they merged and built the necessary capacity and scale. I mean, they've been awarded lucrative auditing firms.
So there's no point then for the set-asides?
Sorry?
There would be no point for setting aside any portion if you got that right. If black business were to come together and have the capacity that we're talking about, there would be no need to set aside a certain percentage, 40% as you've mentioned, for the black business to tender for.
Well, I think they still need, remember, when they merge, they still, even now, if the example I've made, Sizwe and Saluba Goboto, though they've become bigger, but they are nowhere near the big four, as an example. The big four, I mean, those companies employ hundreds of thousands of people. They've got international backup support, from their head office, whereas these merged companies are still small relatively. So therefore, it is still very important that we level the playing field, as it were. There is nothing wrong with that.
One of the companies, or some of the companies that have been found guilty of collusion in the construction case, have said that there is a historical anti-competitive behavior base from which all of the sectors operate, and that it's almost unfair to pick on them, that this is a practice that's done throughout. It may not be right, but it's happening everywhere. How do you propose we deal with that at a strategic level as a country?
Well, I think, in my view, first thing that we need to do is to send a strong message to those that have been found to be practicing, so that all other sectors that are still continuing to practice take it upon themselves, to desist from uncompetitive behavior. I don't think as a country there's anything else that we can do other than setting example, for instance, in those areas and sectors where uncompetitive behavior, collusion has been found out. It's very difficult for anyone to sort of smell where it's happening, as it were, but it is up to individuals who have that fiduciary duty in the various sectors running various companies, to learn from the experience of some of those cases of uncompetitive behavior, of collusion that has been concluded.
What should happen, Mr. Qubeka, to the money that gets recovered in the form of fines from these companies? Like the controversy around this money going back to government and then being misappropriated again, or what should happen to that money once it's recovered?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure whether if it gets back to government it will be misappropriated, because government deals with huge budgets, from the fiscus, as it were. But what we are proposing as Black Business Council is that, given that the exclusion, in fact, precluded transformation to happen, therefore, that money, for instance, could be put into an institution such as a National Empowerment Fund to support economic transformation.
But the concern is that who was robbed here? It is the taxpayer. And should the money not go back to the taxpayer? In the case of the bread and the milk, shouldn't it go back to the consumer? In other words, make the bread cheaper to make up for what these guys have done. Wouldn't you support that kind of argument?
Yeah, well, I think there's a different argument in terms of the fines and how you then make sure that the industry costs come down, as an example. We believe costs naturally will come down, particularly because now it's going to be an open market. There would not be any collusive behavior, as it were. But also we believe that that type of money coming out of these fines that government would not have been budgeted for would then have to address economic transformation, because funding remains one of the major challenges, for Black-owned companies, for small companies in the main. Just now, the National Empowerment Fund has set up a moratorium on taking on new projects because of funding, and that funding has to come from the fiscus, and therefore this would go a long way in assisting Treasury, as an example, in refinancing the National Empowerment Fund. And
your argument is it should be much, much more than the percentage that's been charged now.
Exactly.
We're going to take another short break. We are going to be asking about issues of transformation and also broadly of economic development in South Africa. Stay with us. And we're wrapping up our chat with Xolani Qubeka, who is the CEO of the Black Business Council. Now, just going back to when the Black Business Council was launched, great fanfare, lots of hope. What exactly do you do as an organization besides making those ad hoc statements about, lack of transformation in certain sectors?
Well, I think paramount to our objective was to make sure that Black business can speak in one voice, that we have one singular agenda when we talk about economic transformation. What is it that we are talking about? So we think to a great extent we have achieved that unity amongst Black business, as it were. But another major objective was also just to ensure that when we talk about economic transformation, that there is a broad understanding in terms of what we're trying to achieve as Black business, as it were, because the notion of Black economic empowerment has a lot of ambiguity and misunderstanding. There's been a lot of emphasis, for instance, on talking about BE, whereas as BBC, we are proponents of Black economic empowerment, as it were, but we believe the term itself is abused, is misused. Therefore,
I think that's stating the obvious, though, isn't it? The term is being abused, so what? What do we do about it?
obviously, we had to deal with the context of what government wanted to achieve via BEE. And therefore, from a Black Business Council, one of the things that we have done is to, obviously, after the president of this country pronounced during our summit that there are no black industrialists, or there is a lack of black industrialists in South Africa, rather. We therefore took it upon ourselves to develop that theme and the concept around the creation of black industrialists. So one of the areas that we're working very hard on is a conceptual framework of what the black industrialist is, so that we can then put context in terms of economic transformation, because up until now, you will know people have been decrying that BEE is not working.
But isn't that the problem, Mr. Qubeka, in our country, that we have so many voices poking holes in what already exists in terms of policy and saying this is what's not working with BEE and this is what we need, and then we sit and we have these long discussions about how we should fix it, but at a practical level very few of us are actually doing something about it. So as the BBC, what are you doing practically to make sure that you actualize the transformation that you want to see?
Yeah, by the way, I think it's in a democratic society, it's all and good for people to have a conversation around issue. Yeah, but what I'm saying is the debate itself has been helpful, because it shows that there's a lot of ambiguities. Therefore, as the BBC, we engage government, we have engaged the DTI in pointing out some of the ambiguities and some of the weaknesses of the BEE Act, and as an example. And only last week, the National Assembly now has adopted the new amended BEE Amendment Act, which, as BBC, have played a pivotal role in providing guidance, input, and we had workshops around the country where we sought inputs from our members and even non-members. So there is a lot that we have done in that regard to make sure that there is no ambiguity, and we're satisfied that the new amended act, I think, would provide the necessary difference that would enable in the deepening of economic transformation, as it were.
Talking
so
about that,
I think for us, advocacy has been very, very important to make sure that we
Point
identify
made.
Issues, but also we provide solutions, and we
Point
believe,
made,
therefore,
and
we have
we're running out of time. Here's the thing, though. You've got young people that have formed the Economic Freedom Fighters. That's the party that Julius Malema recently launched. And they're saying, we've been talking too much about economic transformation. We need practical things like nationalizing the mines, like doing all of these things, appropriating the land without compensation, and all of these very radical and militant policies that they want to push forward. Would you, as the Black Business Council, support that kind of militance, that kind of radical change in a country like South Africa?
Well, I think let me talk about our own approach and policies. We have noted a variety, I think, of interest group with regard to what we have just said. But what is important to us is that we need to inculcate a culture of entrepreneurship. There is no radicalism that would make difference, because we need to put substance in terms of what we're talking about. So part of our focus is really the creation of industrialists. What does that entail? It entails us, for instance, promoting the creation of suppliers. People would focus on a variety of sectors who are able to manufacture and
so you would not support the militants that's being proposed by this party?
No, for us, we do not promote militancy at all. We believe with dialogue in this country, with putting up strategies that work, that's what would bring about change.
Just finally, before we let you go, any chances that you might get back in bed, so to speak, with the Business Unity South Africa and work together with them as a unit?
Well, we're already collaborating with Busa. As an example, we signed a tripartite agreement between ourselves, Busa, and the United Nations Development Programme. We have set up what we call a private sector forum that seeks to foster collaboration between SMMEs and large companies, with a view that large companies would outsource a significant amount of their non-core business through SMMEs, as it were. That is one. Secondly, we have signed a memorandum of agreement with Busa again.
Okay, so you are working together. I've got to wrap it up.
Yes, no, we are working together, but at this point in time, going back and merging with Busa is not on the radar screen.
It's not an option. Thank you so
Yes.
much for talking to us here on
Pleasure.
Interface and shedding some light on a variety of issues when it comes to transformation. And thank you for joining us for this program. We're back next week at the same time. Good night.